Hello, my name is Madeline and welcome to Knit with Madeline. Thank you for joining me today. My channel has grown recently, for which I'm very, very grateful. So hello to everybody. On this channel, you'll usually find knitting podcasts, knitting plans videos, and other videos of that more concrete nature. However, as discussed in my first knitting podcast and introduction, I mentioned I'm an academic, specifically a historian. And part of being trained as a historian is learning how to apply a critical eye. Not a pessimistic eye, but a critical eye that seeks to better understand the processes that shape our lives in the past and the present. And since entering the knitting community, there have been a handful of philosophical and even historical knitting topics I've wanted to discuss on my channel. This video is the first in the more philosophical vein, and it seems quite timely. So I'll start with brief background information on the development of this video and the idea behind it. Then we will discuss consumption and trends and how both relate to the generally accepted ethos of knitting. To discuss the elusive and intangible idea of trends, I will be specifically focusing on the growth and popularity of bulky or chunking, roving, or unspun yarns. Finally, we will discuss how all these topics feed into the recent upset regarding We Are Knitters or WAC and Zara's collaboration. I've been ruminating on the idea of consumption and the knitting community for some weeks now, specifically the popularity of chunky yarn, which we'll get to, and I wasn't sure how to broach the topic with my little community on this channel. Then, yesterday I opened my Instagram to see many of the creators I respect speaking out against WAC collaborating with Zara, the details of which we'll get into in a bit. I felt that this was a great moment to tie in a lot of my abstract thoughts into a concrete and very real issue within our larger community. Now, before I begin, I want to make a few disclaimers. Number one, taste, from fashion to art to food, is intensely personal. In making this video, I in no way mean to talk down on other people's personal tastes. Number two, I welcome disagreement and conversation. In fact, starting a conversation is the whole point of this video. So please leave your thoughts below on the topics discussed today. My positionality as a relatively new knitter, immediately steeped in the online knitting community, provided me an interesting viewpoint into consumption trends in the knitting community. As a new knitter, I was immediately introduced to two brands, We Are Knitters and Wool and the Gang. The latter really won't be discussed today and can be explored in a different video on a different day. WAC was advertised as selling yarn incredibly well priced for its quality that would help me learn how to knit. In fact, looking into the company itself, attracting brand new knitters is the main thrust of WAC's marketing campaigns, mainly due to their hallmark yarns, the wool and the petite wool. As of 2021, about a third of their over 400,000 customers had never knitted before. I'll get more into the nitty-gritty, pun intended, WAC information in a moment, but first to discuss consumption. For historians, especially those in my geographical area, Eastern Europe, consumption is an essential aspect of understanding the status of cultural, social, and political realities, both in moments of transition and the everyday. As consumers ourselves, we often think of consumption in terms of ethics or morality, which is undoubtedly important. We'll get back to this view of consumption, but before that, I think it's important to discuss where consumption figures into personal identity, individualism, and normality. On the individual level, consumption is a constitutive aspect of self-fashioning, how we understand ourselves in relation to those around us, and on a macro level, how we understand the dynamics of the world in which we live. How we see the world and the specific context we live in impact the way we consume products, from clothing items to dishwashers to dining room chairs, and what those products mean to us. Consuming specific items such as the product from the West in socialist Yugoslavia, for example, or furniture fashion from an aristocratic style in pre-revolutionary France, reflected the aspirations and worldview of the consumer. When we consume, we exercise personal agency and assert ourselves into the world. The products we consume allow us to tell our communities and the world who we are. This is why consumption is a helpful analytical tool for historians, but also for you and me. What we consume relates to our personal identity, who we are, our aspirations, who we want to be, and what we consider normal, or what makes up the boundaries of our everyday life. Now, given the priorities of today and the capitalist world in which we live, consumption is bound up with ethical or moral behavior. The aspects of consumption discussed previously bear heavily on knitting and the consumption necessary to sustain that activity, but so too does the idea of ethical consumption. When thinking of the ethos of knitting, which I have gathered from the ungodly number of knitting podcasts I consume, I can't wink. As well as forums like Reddit, a major part of knitting is creating slow, intentional fashion that lasts for decades, heirloom pieces, if you will. Of course, the meditative aspects of knitting are part of this. However, part of the meditative aspect of knitting is firmly rooted in knitting slowness and intentionality. We are making garments and items that we love, that we want to wear, that we can mend. Part of why we knit is to be mindful of overconsumption and sustainability, to respect the earth, those around us, and ourselves. Harkening back to my early knitting journey, after being heavily recommended whack yarns and frightened to shell out the amount of money needed to make one sweater from their yarns, I found myself on Reddit reading the thoughts of older, more experienced knitters. These women were perplexed by the popularity of brands like wax, specifically relating to their bulky, roving yarns. They were verklempt about how expensive the yarns were and how short its lifespan would most likely be when knitted up into a fabric. Naturally, they were confused. So why and how did these kinds of yarn become so popular? Obviously, a lot goes into answering this question, and not all of it can be discussed in this format of a video. Personal choice and style interests figure in here, and I'll be frank, I'm not a big fan of chunky weight yarns. I think on other people chunky knits are beautiful, and the patterns some designers make are magnificent, but on my tall and mid-sized frame, I don't find myself gravitating towards chunky knits. Specific pieces attract my attention, like this Ursa sweater I'm wearing today. However, the cost of buying enough bulky yarn from sites like WAC to make one normal size sweater, not cropped, could be near $200 for the petite wool and around $350 for the wool. And that just won't cut it for me. Outside of personal taste, I'm specifically curious about wax and companies like it part in promoting these kinds of yarns. A cursory look into wax history provides some insights into this question. WAC was founded in 2011 as an e-commerce website based out of Madrid, Spain. Their trademark yarn since the beginning of their tenure is their bulky weight unspun yarn. Based on the Wayback Machine, the wool was WAC's debut yarn, followed by the petite yarn, introduced in 2014. The wool debuted at around $20, not factoring in inflation and conversion rates at the time, and the petite wool at around $11. Based on Google Analytics, WAC's popularity massively spiked in 2014 when the petite wool was introduced, and the price of both yarns steadily increased since then. Since around 2017, again from my cursory look, WAC began incorporating knitwear designers into their pattern design and marketing, and both their popularity and the popularity of chunky yarns have grown since. Now, when we look at this basic chart of desire, we can see that chunky yarn has had somewhat of a life of its own. I believe this most likely relates to fashion trends and personal taste of the last few years. Looking at Google Analytics from 2020 to the present, interest in the petite wool, and to a lesser extent, the wool, have peaked immensely, which can be attributed to a variety of reasons, and most frequently are Googled from the United States, and to a lesser extent, the UK. More generally, looking at just WAC and chunky yarn, we can see that in 2014, WAC's popularity spikes while chunky knit stayed within its normal trajectory. Chunky yarns have had popularity since the start of this chart in 2011, but spike in 2017 as interest in WAC grows somewhat steadily until March 2022, where the disparity between the two grow. This chart tells us little more than Google traffic, but it does provide some basic and important indications. To conclude this video, let's bring these somewhat disparate points into one cohesive example. For knitters or those consuming knitting goods, WAC provides a lot. They capture new and advanced knitters through their yarn selection, specifically their hallmark chunky weight yarns and knitting kits, while offering a platform for knitwear designers to expand their reach. Also, WAC tapped into slow fashion movement, stating on their Change the Way You Shop page that WAC is trying to spread the slow fashion movement by bringing new value to handmade fashion items. We work on developing trendy designs and kits for beginners so we can reach younger generations, end quote. Many of these things are good, ethical even, but nuance is important in all areas of life. As a new knitter, I wanted to get the best yarn, the trendy yarn that would easily lend itself into contemporary clothing items. I was led and importantly chose to consume WAC yarns. And to be clear, I was not a WAC hater. I enjoy the merino yarn quite a bit. I wanted to fashion myself as a younger knitter making in garments, and somehow this notion is bound up in a chunky unspun yarn trend that also happened to outprice my budget for my larger frame. Since finding other yarn options and learning more about the lifespan of knits, I've moved away from WAC and became more critical of the company. My email inbox showed me a massive uptick in the number of patterns and kits available, reminding me and other creators like Ocean Knitwear of some of the reasons we as a community criticize fast fashion companies that churn out new items at an alarming rate. Now, I understand WAC is a for-profit company, profit-driven company. Some of this behavior is expected. However, it is interesting that this company, which themselves emphasize the importance of the time and cost that go into a knitted or crocheted garment, has now found themselves partnering with Zara, a fast fashion company that has been heavily scrutinized for abhorrent, slave-like labor conditions, including child labor and firing workers who try to unionize. Now provides a crochet kit priced at £50, while a crocheted shirt on Zara's website currently sells for £20. Mind you, crochet cannot be machine produced. And what I'm hinting at here is what has been discussed on Instagram is that Zara clearly and blatantly underprices a shirt made by the hands of a worker, most likely under duress in a horrible working condition. And now WAC, who reminds their customers, quote, "If knitting your own sweater takes you more than a week and costs more than $90, how can other brands produce them in less than one day for under $20? We encourage everyone to think about the labor costs and production processes that we're supporting. By doing this, we have an opportunity to reduce pollution and our impact on the environment," end quote. This company has joined forces with Zara, all while ignoring the call for accountability made by thousands of knitters on Instagram. So, young knitters can shell out hundreds of dollars to support slow fashion and create a better planet, while your company can rake in the money by working with one of the world's worst fashion brands of our time. Interesting. In summation, WAC has captured a massive swath of the knitting community. They have tapped into the aspirations and desired self-fashioning of young, new knitters. As a major part of the company's success relates to their sale of their chunky yarns which don't last the test of time, as well as other kinds of yarn which is bought primarily by the global north or the west or whatever uncomfortable and often orientalist or racist division of the world that speaks to a region's relation to the means of production. Yarn, which now supports the company to partner with Zara, where the clothing is made in the global south, where workers are taken advantage of in the grossest ways. I don't want to overstate the connections here too much, but I do believe it's important to talk about these issues relating to consumption and knitting, a practice which is so central to a lot of our daily lives. Today, knitters are changing their consumption habits, choosing to consume products from other companies to help locate themselves and their values in the larger knitting community. These changes are important. Our consumption can make a difference. Thank you very much for joining me today to talk about these topics. My opinion is not the be-all and end-all by any means, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think consumption and ethics manifest in knitting? Is it possible for something as slow and intentional as knitting to resemble the practices of fast fashion? If WAC responds to the numerous knitters calling them out, will that be enough? I'll see you all again shortly in a more traditional knitting podcast. Until then, have a wonderful day.